Wednesday morning, market day, as the dawn breaks over the tiny village of Ortoom in West Pokot, and the first stirrings are made in preparation for the day's business. The village itself is tucked away in a valley southwest of the Chirangani Hills in the northwestern corner of Kenya, and it is to here that they come every Wednesday from the mountains, the valleys and the surrounding villages to buy, sell, barter or meet one another. Travelling barefoot on mountain tracks carpeted with stones and thorns and made treacherous by seasonal rainfall they come. For some, a 5 or 6 hour walk down the mountains with a bag of maize, sometimes to be sold, but mostly to be ground in the mill and carried back home. Most of the trade is in fruit, vegetables or maize, but anything from pots and pans to sandals made from recycled tyres are available. With the few Kenyan shillings gathered from the sale of their produce, they perhaps buy oil for their lamps or medicine for their children. Market day is a chance to do business, to rest, to sit and chat with friends, and for the women it is a brief respite from the tedium which is their lives. And so it was to this remote part of Kenya that 2 Holy Rosary sisters and a Kiltegan priest came in 1956 to set up their mission. They settled in the valley and found a people living mostly in the mountains by tribal rituals and traditional customs, dressed in the skins from their sheep and cattle and richly adorned by jewellery and beads. The simple lives that these people had lived for centuries was suddenly intruded upon, but they were resistant to change, as the white man and his strange ways were feared. The word of God slowly filtered through, but only when something tangible came with it in the form of food and medicine. The tree on which the priest slept that first night still stands today in front of the present church as testimony to their pioneering spirit. From these humble beginnings almost 40 years ago, the mission has grown to 3 schools, a polytechnical, a 110-bedded hospital, with laboratory, X-ray facilities and an operating theatre. The schools, all once run by the sisters, have now been handed over to the Kenya government and are staffed by African teachers. The Holy Rosary sisters still manage the hospital. For them, finance is a huge problem. Finding money to pay the staff monthly, buy food, fuel, drugs and pay the upkeep is a difficult job. With the rising cost of drugs, it's getting more difficult to make ends meet, with no assistance coming from the Kenya government. The patients contribute what they can, many by selling a goat or sheep, which though small does help greatly. Without overseas aid from organisations as well as many voluntary donations, the services at Ortoom could not be maintained. Father Leo Staples has spent over 40 years in the district. He has long since left Ortoom, which is now in the hands of an African priest, and has moved on with the other Kiltegan fathers to continue their evangelisation in further remote parts. There is quite a large Catholic community there now, and they partake in the Mass and rituals with a vibrancy and enthusiasm that we in Western societies do little to match. The hospital in 1969 introduced training of nurses, and this was then upgraded in 1985 to encompass midwifery also. The School of Nursing in Ortoom provides staff for the hospital, which by virtue of its isolation fails to attract and retain sufficient qualified staff. Qualified staff from Ortoom are also contracted to other smaller missions in further remote areas, which also would not be able to secure nurses for their services. Currently, there are 96 students taking the 2.5-year course, which will lead to a qualification as an enrolled community health nurse. The course is open to boys and girls from all over the country, but preference is given to local youngsters. Unfortunately, the Pokot place very little interest in education, primarily because the school fees involved are way beyond the means of these people. As a result, the number of Pokots entering training is quite low, as the boys get preference over the girls when just 1 or 2 can be educated. The course is wide-ranging, and once qualified, they should be in a position to manage rural dispensaries or clinics. Most, however, on qualifying, prefer to return nearer to their homes or to the larger urban centres where life is easier. Because of the area to be served is so large and public transport so erratic, rural dispensaries provide a valuable link in the healthcare programme, serving people who otherwise might not undertake the arduous journey down the mountain to the hospital. In this one, 30 kilometres from Ortoom, common conditions are treated, and only the more serious cases are referred to the hospital for further treatment or to be seen by the doctor. The Pokot are by tradition pastoralists, herding sheep, goats and cattle on the mountainside, which for the most part is bare, rocky and covered with scrub vegetation. It does not lend itself well to agriculture. However, hunger and necessity force the hands of the women into digging irrigation trenches in an attempt to grow maize for their families. Terracing of the land is done to prevent what little soil there is from being washed down the mountain when heavy rain falls. There are a few fertile valleys interspersed throughout the hills, from which the bulk of the food produced in the area comes. Work on it is slow and tedious, and if the seasonal rain is late, the ground becomes scorched dry and vegetation is practically non-existent. Survival becomes a daily struggle for man and beast. Stream beds dry completely, and only the larger rivers continue to run until the seasonal rainfall returns and brings lush greenness with it. Flooding is a feature of life here too, and washes much soil away that can little be spared. Maize is the mainstay of survival, as it grows well on the sunny mountain slopes. Its success, however, is dependent on the April and September rains arriving on time. Fruit, potatoes and kale constitute the rest of their diet, but protein in the form of meat or fish is scarce, and the children suffer from malnutrition in varying degrees as a result. Life, for the most part, is at subsistence level, and a poor maize crop can make the difference between life and death, with the children as always being the first victims. Food in the hospital is provided 3 times a day, with beans included to give the necessary protein. In the early months of 1994, a severe nationwide drought left over 100,000 head of cattle dead, and a severe food shortage all over. An intensive feeding programme was instigated in the hospital for the children, but for many it was too little, too late. Large families are still very much the norm, like these 2 men who have 56 children between them. Most men still take 3 to 4 wives and have up to 30 children. In time, when the child mortality rate drops, family size will also decrease, but that is still very much in the future, with 1 in 4 still dying before the age of 5. Malaria is the single biggest killer, both directly or through the resultant anemia or premature births. It is endemic to this area, as the mosquito who spreads it thrives well in the warm climate. Treatment is relatively cheap, widely available, and most cases are treatable if caught on time. A severe outbreak in the summer of 1994 claimed over 200 lives in an 8-week period in the hospital, the majority again being children, already weakened by hunger and anemia. There is a strange acceptance of death here, one that we find difficult to understand. They shrug and say it is the will of God. The body they leave as they fear the spirit of death, so it is left to be buried close by, where so many have gone before, and the family goes home to mourn yet another loss. Besides tropical diseases, conditions such as pneumonia, gastroenteritis, the victims of road accidents and fights provides the mainstay of the hospital's business. Diarrhoea is a big problem, and due to the scarcity of linen, and in an attempt to prevent its spread in an overcrowded ward, many of them are nursed outside. It is also more in keeping with their home environment, and they just bask all day in the heat of the sun. A limited number of drugs is available, but they are usually adequate for our needs, and what cannot be coped with is referred to the government hospital in town. Conventional medicine is sometimes used by these people as a last resort, having first tried a variety of herbal remedies. The role of the traditional healer is still very important, with remedies being made from the bark, roots and leaves of trees and smaller plants. Some of them can be quite useful, but with little or no research done, they can often cause more harm than good and lead to death by poisoning or overdosage. Contagious diseases are the cause of much morbidity and death. TB, which was rampant when the mission was first set up, has been very much brought under control, but is set to soar again as the number of people with HIV increases. In the meantime, the vaccinations and the isolation of those affected continues, but around the corner there is always another meningitis epidemic or some new misfortune ready to befall these poor people. Sanitation is poor and is the cause of a lot of problems. Water supply comes mostly from the mountain streams, and while it is pure and clean higher up, by the time it reaches the valley it has become quite contaminated, as it serves almost every human purpose. Preventative medicine is the key to success in any healthcare programme, and this is what the community-based healthcare team are striving for in Ortoom. There are 23 outstations being visited on a regular basis, some of which are up to 50 kilometres from the hospital. Access to these, by and large, is by four-wheel drive only, as the terrain is mountainous, rough, and some roads are little more than mountain tracks. Numerous riverbeds have to be negotiated, and heavy rain can make some places inaccessible during the wet season. Teaching the people to help themselves is the basis of any long-term developmental programme, and though progress is slow, it is there to be seen. The sound of the approaching vehicle and horn beckons people from their homes, and they make their way to the local schoolhouse or church, which doubles as a clinic for the day. These clinics are primarily aimed at pregnant mothers and children up to 2 years of age, but often the sick are brought along for transfer to the hospital. Schools are also serviced and the children are checked over. The days of unending handouts with which the early missionaries were associated are over. The people are now being encouraged to take responsibility for their health and that of their children. These women, when gathered together, have a great spirit of happiness, and a song will always be sung before the real business of the day is attended to. Education, as always, is of the utmost importance and forms the basis of any gathering. For these people, many of whom have never been to school, these discussions on issues like hygiene, nutrition and sanitation are received with enthusiasm, but practical application at home may be forgotten, as they revert to such things as drinking unclean water again. Their means are so poor that it makes change difficult. Motivators are chosen and trained from among their own people, and they encourage even the more reticent to come along and avail of the offered services. Weighing scales are pretty basic but serviceable, and the little children are weighed to check their progress. Underweight ones will be followed up and supplementary feeding may be given, as the reason might just be that there are too many children at home and too little food. An extensive immunisation programme is underway for babies. The injections themselves are free, but a nominal fee is charged for the service. Over 14,500 immunisations were given last year, both through the outreach programme and in the hospital. The effect of this can be seen as the occurrence of polio and measles is rare, and TB, while still seen, has diminished. The initiation into adulthood of both boys and girls by radical circumcision is a ritual that has been left behind by many African tribes, but is still widely practiced by the Pokot. An uncircumcised woman will not be a married woman, and an unmarried woman has no status in the community, so the circle continues unbroken. The circumcision ceremonies take place every other year around November or December, and while it is a time of great feasting and celebration for the elders, for the boys and girls of 13 or 14 who must undergo this mutilation, their anaesthetic is exhaustion and their suffering a sacrifice as they follow the footsteps of their ancestors in the proud tradition of the Pokot. Childbirth for these women, while never easy, has been made more difficult because of this radical circumcision. Because of the dangers involved and the difficulty, these women are encouraged to attend the antenatal clinics and to have their babies in hospital. Many of the myths surrounding this have been dispelled over the years, and the numbers are increasing, with many coming from the mountains to spend the last few weeks beside the hospital and coming daily to be seen. Birth attendants traditionally serve the area, but their knowledge and expertise left much to be desired. Today there is still a place for them, but they are now better trained and attend workshops run by the programme. Ortum, translated from the Pokot, means the road to the celebration. There is, however, for most people, very little to celebrate about life here, and for the women it is particularly hard. In a polygamous society like this, they are married young, many at 16, 17 or less, and become third or fourth wives. They are provided with a house, the centrepiece of which is the hearth, a simple structure of 2 flagstones to hold the fuel, while the pot balances on top. Should the marriage fail, the hearth is the first thing to be dismantled in a symbolic gesture. Along with their little house, they get a small plot of land, sometimes nothing more than barren rocky mountainside. This is theirs to till in order to feed their families. The digging, terracing, irrigating, planting, whatever work needs to be done, in fact, is theirs, the menfolk sometimes giving a hand. Besides caring their children, the rest of their day is spent fetching and carrying firewood and water, maize to the mill and flour back home, herding the goats and sheep, and on Wednesdays bringing what little produce they can afford to the market. They are quite adept at alcohol production too, their maize being the raw material for spirits, while anything from potatoes to bananas will make beer. Demand is high and they sell cheaply. By their mid-30s they had given birth to large families, watched one or two of them die, and strive to educate a few, and continue to do the very best they can with their very limited resources. Their housing is poor, just mud huts with thatched roofs. They are made from a frame of branches intertwined into which soft mud is packed so tightly that it dries to an unshakably solid wall. They provide welcome respite from the searing heat of the sun, but little comfort against the rain and freezing temperatures on the mountain tops. Pneumonia thus is a common problem, as clothing is inadequate when the rain falls, and blankets are also quite scarce. Very often there is nothing to wrap a newborn baby in, and he ends up in the none-too-clean garment removed from his mother. But despite the simplicity and hardship of their lives, like women the world over, they enjoy a wedding, and they will sing for hours at the roadside waiting for the bride. The dowry system of other cultures works in reverse here, with the bride price being payable to the bride's father. This usually takes the form of cash, together with a number of sheep and goats. The number of animals that change hands are counted, and an equal number of knots are tied on a piece of gut from an animal. This is then woven into a bracelet and worn by the woman as testimony to her worth. The building of the road in the 1970s that connects our tomb with the outside world has provided a wealth of difference to the community. Up until then, the people lived very isolated lives, cut off with little or no contact between them and the other tribes, apart from cattle raids with their neighbours and enemies, the Turkana. They were a self-sufficient people, surviving as their ancestors had on what their land produced. What used to be a trading centre then, with just one shop, could now be called a small village, with many families earning a living in their little shops. New settlers have moved in over the years, and some of the businesses are now owned by Somalis. With public transport cheap though perilous, the people are travelling more now, out of our tomb to nearby towns and even further afield to work. The price of this development, however, has been the introduction of aids into the area. Most of the trucks carrying relief supplies from the harbour in Mombasa to the Sudanese refugee camps in northern Kenya pass through our tomb, and in a polygamous society like this, AIDS will spread rapidly. There is still a lot of ignorance and disbelief about it here, so emphasis is put on education through the schools, the community healthcare programme and in the hospital. It is an uphill struggle though, because traditional beliefs, customs and polygamy run deeper than the fear of a disease that most have only heard of and blame the Americans for. The number of people who have actually died of AIDS here is still quite small, but with the incidence increasing in the nearby towns, these people will have to change the basic structure of their society in order to survive. The mission at our tomb has come a long way in the past 40 years and has served the people of West Pokot well. The mortality rate of children has dropped considerably. Hundreds of nurses have been trained, thousands of children have been educated, the social and economic standard of the area has been raised, and the word of God brought to the ears of many. But there is still much to do. Equipment for the most part remains poor and basic. Power is by means of a generator, and almost everything is recycled until it becomes perished. Tiny babies get the very best available to them, but they deserve more. A new special care baby unit is being built at the moment, which will have piped oxygen, but still no electricity or solar power, so the incubator will continue to gather dust, while premature babies are warmed by the sun during the day, and at night on hot water bottles, wrapped in space blankets recycled from a Dublin hospital. The environment too, being as rugged as it is, makes progress difficult and slow, and work for a long time will just be work to survive. Distance too is a big factor. Distance through such high mountains, 11 or 12,000 feet high, where no roads or public transport have yet gone, and with so little along the way in the line of food or comfort. Yet back to the mountains they continue to go, sometimes in sorrow, sometimes in sickness, and sometimes happy as they pass through fields of maize and look forward to a plentiful harvest. Despite all the hardships of the mountains, they offer security, they are happy there, and it's home. Both skilled and unskilled workers have been finding work here for the last 40 years and have been able to educate some of their children as a result. However, the brain drain is in operation here too, with most of these people moving away to work, while the remainder stay and undertake the health and welfare of their own people. Only one man has become a qualified medical doctor to date, and he works some 200 miles away. The fight against AIDS must also go on. To these people, born into an impoverished society, who have known hunger, disease, injustice, poverty, heartbreak, and survived them all to adulthood, AIDS is the final insult. A harsh punishment for the simple crime of living in the traditions of their forefathers. For some, it is already too late, but for the Holy Rosary Sisters and the people of West Pokot, the work must continue.
Here at the National Safari Park outside Nairobi, you see one side of Africa, that which attracts tourists from all over the world every year. However, there are many hundreds of Irish people, both here in Kenya and in neighbouring Somalia, who come here not for this, not for leisure, but instead for work. These are the aid personnel, and they come to educate, to run hospitals and to distribute food aid in emergencies. Somalia has been much in the news over the last couple of weeks. Right now, the US Marines have moved in, but there's an uneasy peace in the capital, Mogadishu. For Irish people who work for organisations like Concern, Goal and the Red Cross, their efforts continue. The Somali capital is now a militarised zone. More than 1,500 US Marines are firmly in place, together with smaller contingents from other countries. The port is the focus of much of the activity. It's become part of the US military command structure in the city. Many hundreds of Marines are billeted here, and military vehicles use the port as a base from which to mount their patrols into the city. Meanwhile, relief ships are docking for the first time in many months. Thousands of tons of maize, beans and vegetable oil have been stockpiled at the port, unable to be moved because of the security situation. To date, armed clansmen have been able to loot the provisions at will, but now everything that's left is being trucked out in safety. Downtown, along the dusty high streets of Mogadishu, the arrival of the Americans has brought big changes. Just a few weeks ago, armed clansmen with Kalashnikov rifles held sway here. Now the guns have gone, replaced by the chatter of commerce. The city, which 3 years ago was one of the most beautiful in Africa, is beginning to approach something like normality. Even the dealing in chat, a local narcotic leaf, continues apace. The now rejuvenated commercial life of the city, however, masks the fact that in Somalia there are still 2 million people in danger of starvation. The arrival of the troops has raised hopes that food aid, which armed gangs previously looted, will now start to reach those who really need it. Just yards away from the bustling main streets, feeding camps are working flat out. One of these, just outside the city centre, run by Concern, feeds 2,500 people every day. 2 months ago, many of those at the camp were on the brink of starvation. They trekked miles to get help. And now, as a result of daily feeding, with a special high-energy, high-protein diet, most of them are on the mend and they're getting stronger. Right, Valerie, we're here in one of your feeding stations. Can you tell us exactly what's going on here?
Okay, well the children are here for their afternoon meal of Unimix and milk, and then before they go home they get milk and biscuits again. This is their second feed of the day. Basically we feed 2,500 children every day. And this is one of the rooms where the children were originally very malnourished and who are now quite healthy, and they're over 75 to 80% weight. Right.
You were saying there that it's Unimix. If I can just have a look at it there for a second, it looks fairly like milk, doesn't it really?
Yeah, well really.
What is it exactly?
The Unimix is like it's like a porridge type substance, and it's quite watered down now because most of the people like to add milk to it.
What's this one here?
This is the Unimix now as it comes.
Right.
This is Unimix with milk on it. It's watered down because they like to add milk. It makes it more easy to swallow for them because they find it very bland after a while when they're eating. So
yeah. And how long have these people actually been here at this centre?
This centre's been open since May, so most of these people have been attending since May. Any new admissions we get will be quite malnourished. We don't take any more. So far, we just can't take any more healthy admissions, so we just take.
Well, the people that we see around us here now, they seem to be fairly healthy to my untutored eye, are they?
Yeah, most of them are fairly healthy. A lot of them still have diseases that mightn't be very evident to, like scabies. A lot of them have chest infections. But basically, these children are all healthy, and if they do get ill, we keep an eye on them and we can give them basic medicines to treat that.
Practically all those at the camp have been displaced from their homes by the war between bands of armed clansmen, which has raged for several years throughout the country. For most, the plan is to stay for a while in Mogadishu, get strong and go back home. The camps, of course, are just the last link in a complex operation to get food to where it's needed. The Irish Red Cross in Mogadishu is active in the process of getting the food aid moving and delivering it to the hungry.
Well, at the moment we're offloading food for distribution towards the kitchens here. We have 301 kitchens that we distribute food to every day.
Right, and when you talk about food, are we talking about the same sort of stuff you'd buy at home, or is it special food?
Yeah, well, not exactly. Their staple diet here is rice, beans, lentils and vegetable oil, and they're cooked in the kitchens every day and distributed to the people in need.
Well, of course, the Americans have come now, and a lot of people seem to have the idea, certainly at home, that everything's going to change, that you've got light at the end of the tunnel. Is that so?
Yeah, we have to be positive about it. It's early days yet, and the food is getting through now a little bit easier, so we're hopeful for the future.
Yet another camp, this time outside Somalia. So far, Mogadishu is getting most of the attention. But there are many Somali refugees scattered outside the city, and indeed there are some who are outside the country, like at Marafa in Kenya. There are 10,000 refugees here being looked after by the Red Cross. They've been at Marafa for 2 months, living in tents without a proper toilet amongst the lot of them. Pop into as well, Neil, will you please?
Father Sean Dwyer is a Kiltegan priest who has worked in Africa for decades. His efforts are now co-funded by APSO, the Agency for Personal Service Overseas, and an Irish Body Refugee Trust. Father Dwyer is now working among the refugees at Marafa.
When they come here, they are given initial emergency help, and then they are registered as asylum seekers, and they are given ration cards, and they are given zones and places to stay in the camp. And then with their ration cards they can come each day, and it is easily then to identify who got food today. I mean, people can come 3 times, 4 times a day if there isn't some kind of a system, and this system works quite well.
Well, how long do you think they're going to stay in this camp?
Initially, people did not know. Maybe now with this whole new change, with the UN intervening in Somalia, it would seem to me that the time could be much shorter. But we really don't know at this stage. We really don't know. Initially, we were thinking in terms maybe of 2 years.
Of course, dealing with the problem of refugees is just one aspect of the work of Irish Aid personnel in Africa. In Khartoum, 6 hours drive away from Nairobi in northern Kenya, there's a hospital just here behind me, which was set up more than 30 years ago by Irish people. Right now, there's an Irish doctor working here, several Irish nurses, and the whole unit is administered by a nun from the Holy Rosary Order. Last year, more than 300 children were delivered here, and there were in excess of 200 different operations performed.
The hospital is in the hinterland of the Pokot tribe, many of whom live in the mountains and only seek medical help in emergencies. The Pokots are often involved in clashes with neighbouring tribes, and when we were filming, 3 young girls had just been admitted, shot in a tribal raid.
They were attacked in the hut this morning by Tucanos. So I have 3 girls who is wounded, but maybe this one has a bullet inside. But the other, they say so, the parents. I don't know if it's true. A bullet? Yeah. They were shot by gun.
Can we get a blanket, please, or something? Have we got any morphine for her? We need running. 1 second. Wait, I'm right around there. Yeah, okay. Yeah, she bent. A bit of air is all we needed.
The most seriously injured of the young girls was transferred to a nearby hospital for an operation, and she was expected to survive. Of course, much of Khartoum's work is of a thankfully more mundane nature.
His hemoglobin on the last recheck was 14.
Okay,
it went from 7 to 14,
so that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was after 2 transfusions.
Right. Can I just have a look?
Yeah. I think he's got a little bit of oral thrush this morning.
All right. Abadi Yaruto.
And he's feeding quite well sometimes, but he gets tired quite quickly.
Yes, but he was very tiny when he was born, so he's really done quite well.
Deirdre O'Gorman, a doctor from Dublin, is on a 2-year contract with APSO. For her at Khartoum, it's a question of making the best of available facilities.
The next hospital or the next healthcare unit of any size other than a little dispensary is about 40 minutes drive, and the vast majority of people here walk. So our patients come in from anywhere from the distance of 3 days walk from here, and if they don't come here, they don't go anywhere.
The hospital is dependent for its medical expertise on volunteer doctors and nurses. Irish personnel have always played their part.
Well, as it is at the moment, it's quite ideal at the moment with we have 7 volunteers altogether. That is quite enough at the moment, but they go every 2 years. So it's the replacement of them, and the continuing replacement of them and recruitment is the difficult thing. We had a very big space now in the past year when we did not have volunteers, and it was very difficult.
The problem of finding personnel applies all over, especially to emergencies like Mogadishu. Irish agencies say a more positive attitude from employers would encourage more skilled people to work in the Third World.
It actually happened that it's easier to get people for short term. They will get a leave of absence. We would be looking for organisations and institutions at home to let people come out for a 2-year period to work in long-term development and let it be easy for them to go back into their jobs, to give leave of absences. It is happening, but we need it to happen more.
Do you think we need a change of attitude back home in Ireland with regard to, you know, companies maybe looking on this kind of service in a positive way?
Absolutely. I mean, we are professional people out here working, and we want our work to be recognised. We don't want to be considered goody-goodies. We're not. We make choices. We come out here because this is where we want to be. And if we were given the opportunity to take a leave of absence, or we have some level of security, I think more people will come.
Right now, there are